This keyboard changed everything. And I seriously mean that, because last year when Akko released the Monsgeek M1, it shook up the market forever. But wait, what's this? Oh no, they're not doing it again. They're not doing it again, are they? Let's talk about that. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hipyo, it's 2024. I don't want to build a keyboard anymore. And that rhyme made me very sad. And I get it. Within the last year, a ton of pre-built keyboards have come out that have been better than anything you could assemble on the same budget. And I know what else you're thinking. What about Hall Effect? I want a game. I'm a gamer now, Hipyo. I've grown up. Well, you're gonna want to stick around, because in this video, I've got 2 new keyboards from Akko, aka Monsgeek, and I'll let them speak for themselves. Wow. But what I didn't expect is that building a keyboard made a better keyboard? What is this, 2023? Now, this story begins with the $99 keyboard, the Monsgeek M1. But then Akko reached out and said, hey, we're making a V3 of it. And by the way, it's $30 cheaper. And I said, okay, howdy hey. I'll also be looking at the Hall Effect version, which is really cool, but we'll talk about that later. Now, full disclosure, this video is sponsored by Akko, who did not review this video. They did not tell me what to say, and all of my thoughts are my own. I'm very privileged in that when I work with keyboard brands, I just let them reserve a time slot, and that's it. Now, with the Monsgeek M1, there's a lot of different things going on that changes the price around just a little bit. But the basic bare bones version that we're looking at today starts at $69.99. But it goes up to $75 if you want the purple version, like I think I have. And there's also pre-built versions, but you might not want to buy those, and I'll talk about that later. Now, as far as the accessories go, I see they stuck with the same cable that I absolutely hated last year. You also got a really nice switch puller, a keycap puller, and some weird gasket things. There's also an additional set of stabilizers, but I think that's really weird. Also, in my last video, I said bye-bye Mr. Box, and a lot of you like that, so let me just go ahead and say bye-bye Mr. Box. Bye-bye. Wow, I miss him already. I miss him every day. Now, when looking at this keyboard, there's a couple things that I want to keep in mind. Number 1, does it feel premium? Because it's certainly priced pretty affordably. Number 2, is it easy to build so that if I was new to keyboards, I wouldn't be too confused? And number 3, does it look and sound nice? Which the back doesn't have any cool weights or adornments or anything. Now, there are a few important changes from the V1. Most notably, the knob grew a little bit, probably because of how much I was touching it, and they got rid of the side cutout accent. This is a really interesting choice, as the side cutout accent was what set the Monsgeek boards visually apart from a lot of other 75%, but I get why they did it, because it did look a little bit tacky, and it did probably hurt the sound of the keyboard. The gasket performance isn't notably different, and overall you're looking at a really solid chunk of aluminum here. Well, 2 chunks, the top plate and the bottom plate, and the visible seam down the middle. Now, the V1 had a lot of ping, and honestly, I'm not getting that much here so far, so that's exciting. Maybe they fixed it. Maybe they did something in the internals that I'll be looking at later in the video. Now, here's some things that are exciting about this board. The white and black colors are in stock, and you can buy them right now, and they'll ship right away. Granted, shipping does cost $24.99. And did I mention the knob that they made bigger? Well, technically it's flatter, but I do really like it. It feels a little bit more premium. Now, if you're new to keyboards and you're wondering what a knob does, it adjusts the volume. That's it. But here's where it gets interesting, because this board has plate mount stabilizers pre-installed and pre-lubed, and they were better than the screw-in stabilizers from the V1. What? And the board is also hot swappable, which is kind of expected nowadays with most keyboards, but that means that you can take out switches and replace them as much as you'd like without needing to solder. Now, in my opinion, bare bones boards are almost always better, because it means you can choose exactly what you want to put in them. In this case, I've chosen Marandi switches. Now you're probably wondering, Hipyo, why didn't you put Akko switches in the Akko keyboard? And I have 600 of these that I want to use. That's it. Now for the magnetic board, I have some magnetic switches that I want to try, but we're gonna soon learn that that's not gonna work out, sadly. Marandi switches are a pre-lubed linear that I'll have linked down below, and they are just one of my favorite go-to good enough switches. They're not perfect, they're not the best by any means, but they are really consistent for me, so that's why I use so many of them. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is that there's an M1W V3, which means that it's wireless with 2.4 gigahertz options. It's also the only version with an ISO option if you're in Europe, sorry Europe gang, and it starts at about 15 bucks more. One thing that is super cool is that Akko lets you bundle switches and keycaps in with your order, and they give you a discount on them. And I can attest that Akko's lube switches are very good and their keycaps are pretty decent. Now, in typical keyboard enthusiast fashion, I'm gonna put a set of keycaps on my keyboard that cost more than my keyboard costs, and that's GMK DMG. But on the real, I got these as a buy one get one, so they were basically half off. That's what I tell myself to sleep at night, and I thought they looked cool. When building your keyboard, you can go with any type of keycap. Just generally know that GMK or double shot ABS keycaps will sound a little bit clackier, and die-sub PBT or really thick keycaps will sound a little bit thockier. Personally, I like scratching NOLA with any of them. Now at this point, you're probably looking at the video timeline and you're like, wait, he's built the keyboard, we're only 6 minutes in, what is going on? And that's because the keyboard build is actually only the beginning. And later in this video, I'm gonna be taking this board apart and modding it, and you're gonna wanna stick around for that because it sounds better without the foam. What? Now, personally, I think this board looks absolutely gorgeous, but you can let me know what you think with a comment down below, as long as it's kind of nice and doesn't hurt my feelings. Please don't comment, wow, Hipyo, I can't believe you spent $134.99 on a set of keycaps. You're incredibly cringe, Hipyo. You've gone against everything you've ever stood for. Because that's true. The truth hurts. Now, I went the expensive route for building this keyboard, but if you went with a set of Akko switches, which is like $15 to $20, and then a set of Akko keycaps, which is like $25 to $30, you could get basically the same experience, but it would be a lot cheaper. Now, I'll save my final thoughts for the end of the video, of course, but real quick, I'll give you a sound test of what the board sounds like, and then we'll get to the magnetic keyboard, because that's really cool. Ooh, yeah. Now, I do think they solved all of the sound problems with this thing stock, but it's still sounding just a little bit chattery, and I think I have a fix for that, which we'll get to later. But next, you remember how I mentioned magnets? Let's take a look at the M1V3HE, which stands for Hall Effect, like the Wu-Ting keyboards. Now, at first glance, this thing is unfortunately, kinda ugly. Like, the gradient is really cool, but then they put the front legends on this thing because they had to go with shine through. And yeah, I'm really not the biggest fan of it visually, but that's not what's important here. We don't care about visuals. We're gamers. We have RGB setup. Now, if you're wanting to be a pro gamer, you're gonna have to spend a pro gamer price tag because this thing starts at $130 US and goes up to 160. And you're probably wondering, why? Why would they do that? And it's a little thing that I like to call Buzzword of the Year. Now, a couple years back, Buzzword of the Year was optical, because optical was really cool. Wow, your switches use light, neat. Recently, the buzzword of the year is Hall Effect, or magnetic switches. Now, I've already done multiple videos on the Wu-Ting keyboards that go way more into depth on this type of thing, so if you're interested in that, then watch those videos first. But in the last year, there's been an arms race that I've just kind of ignored, and the arms race is to build the best Hall Effect keyboard. And in my opinion, nobody's gotten there yet, but this might be a little bit closer. Now, personally, I'm not a fan of really chattery keycaps, so I would take these shine-through keycaps and probably throw them in the garbage and replace them with something better. But if you had to stick with them, they wouldn't be the worst, like they're still a keycap. But what makes this thing unique is the Akko line of Hall Effect switches, and you might notice they look a little bit different than some other Hall Effect switches. That's really important, and we'll talk about that later. Now, at a glance, they feel buttery smooth. You don't have any resistances in the switch, you're just getting a smooth key press. Now, Hall Effect switches have gotten a lot better recently, like the new stuff from Gateron, which hopefully we'll check out later. Now, they call these the cream yellow V2s, and I tried the cream yellow V1s and was so underwhelmed that I didn't even make a video on them. So the cream yellow V2s are a bit more interesting. What I noticed is that the bottom was flat, and I wanted to try and use some Gateron switches, so I had to clip the pins on the Gateron, and let's see if they work. The reason being is that I think the Gateron switches are just a little bit deeper, and I like that about them. However, we might run into some issues. Now, the stabilizers on the Hall Effect board are the same, but you know what's not the same? The compatibility with Gateron or other Hall Effect switches. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a closed ecosystem, but hopefully that can be fixed in the future with some firmware tuning or something like that. Now, why did I want to swap out these switches? Well, they are better than the Wu-Ting Lecker switches, but that's really not saying much because I really hated the Wu-Ting Lecker switches. Now, as it currently stands, I'm really not that into Hall Effect. Like, I play a ton of games, I play Valorant, and I don't really appreciate the benefits of Rapid Trigger. But that's just me. If you do like Rapid Trigger, then we're gonna need to talk about the firmware. Now, Rapid Trigger basically means that when you press the key and you slightly release, it resets your key press so you can immediately press it again. This is really helpful for some niche gaming tasks like OSU or side strafing in certain shooter games, but in general, it's a little bit overhyped, just a little bit. One thing that might also be frustrating is that when you get this board, you kind of do really need to run a manual calibration on it, which is really easy to do with their software, but yeah, you're gonna have to do that the first time you use it. But you're probably wondering, Hipyo, why aren't you talking that much about the latency or the really fast actuation time or anything like that? And I've talked about that before in rapid trigger videos, but I also want to test all of this stuff before I get any data or claims. And I just don't have the equipment ready for that, but I'm working on it. So, you know, one day. But ultimately, my experience with this board was pretty similar to my experience with Wu-Tang boards. I'm not a Hall effect expert by any mean, and I'm not a gaming expert that can take advantage of those features, so I'm really not the person to tell you whether or not that's good or not. But what I can tell you is that this thing really doesn't sound that good. Just go ahead and give it a listen. Yeah, I don't know. There's just something about that signature Hall effect chatter that really rubs me the wrong way for sound, but if you can get over that, then maybe this keyboard is for you. But going back to the M1V3, let's take this thing apart. And keep in mind, a lot of the internals and everything are the same here between the Hall effect version and the other one, just the main difference being the PCB. Now, what I noticed is that this thing is also just a little bit chattery, and part of what I think that is all of these PETG foams. They've done a super good job at insulating the keyboard, and they've even listened and used more silicone like foams, because I recommended that, guys. Look, it was me. But one thing that's fun to do on more premium boards is actually remove the foam, because then you can kind of fiddle with the sound profile and see, do I want a lot of aluminum sound? Do I want it to sound really dampened and muted and thawky? Who knows? Now, after not trying this at home, I've pried the board apart from its PCB. Remember, don't try this at home. And then I removed all of the foam from the keyboard except the foam in between the plate and PCB. I took out the PE foam, the PETG foam, etc. Now, one thing I really like about this board overall is that it's got a solid enough construction that you can do all of this without making the board sound just super pingy and terrible. But you also have a ton of different foam options if you want to customize the sound and the feel, as removing foam does give you more of a gasket performance, which is really nice. What I personally noticed is that after removing the foam, I liked the sound a little bit more. It sounded just a little bit less chattery and a little bit more board soundy. But maybe you'd prefer to fill this thing with Play-Doh. I don't know. Now, if you're someone that wants to build your own keyboard and doesn't like the pre-built options, then this is a really good deal. There's other boards that will give you a lot more value if you're looking for the pre-built route, but if you're someone that wants the choice, which cannot be understated how good choice is, then I would possibly consider this thing, because it's a solid aluminum board that doesn't do a lot wrong.